Today, the Supreme Court handed former President Donald Trump a win. The court ruled that former presidents are immune from criminal prosecution for their official conduct, but not for unofficial acts. CBS News' Nicole Skanga is live outside the Supreme Court with more on this. Nicole.
Good afternoon, Shayna. Former President Donald Trump declared victory after the decision today, calling it a big win, even fundraising off of it. But his federal election interference case, well, that can still move forward as justices weighed in, saying any unofficial acts while he was in the White House are not shielded from future criminal prosecution.
The Supreme Court issued a landmark decision on presidential immunity in a case that directly affects former President Trump. In a 6-3 ruling, the conservative majority divided presidential conduct into 3 categories. Official acts that are part of the president's core constitutional powers, for which the president has absolute immunity. Other official acts outside the president's exclusive authority have presumptive immunity, and there is no immunity for unofficial acts.
On the majority side, they, I think, very legitimately were concerned about the threat of future presidents possibly being prosecuted.
The ruling affects special counsel Jack Smith's prosecution of Trump for his alleged efforts in the overturning of the 2020 election results. The case now goes back to the lower court.
He's going to take a big scissors to the indictment, and he's going to cut out any counts that relate or could be even close to relating to official acts.
In a scathing dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor warned the ruling insulates the commander-in-chief from criminal prosecution, no matter how he uses his official powers, even if it's for an assassination, military coup, or a bribe.
I think the lens she was coming from is no person is above the law.
Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in his majority opinion that no president is above the law, and the court ultimately rejected Trump's argument that he has absolute immunity unless impeached by the House and convicted by the Senate.
With just over 4 months until the presidential election, Monday's ruling makes it highly unlikely Trump will face trial in the election interference case before then.
If former President Trump wins the election in November, well, he could order the Department of Justice to dismiss that election subversion case outright. At the Supreme Court, Nicole Skanga, I'll send it back to you.
All right, thank you, Nicole. And let's bring in former federal prosecutor Rick Convertino to break all of this down now. So what this hinges on is official acts versus private acts. 2 kinds of official acts, the kind that have to do with the president's core duties, other official acts, and then unofficial acts. Can you break down the difference between what all of that means?
Well, you did a good job right there. There are 3 conditions, essentially 3 actions that the court delineated. As you said, official acts, unofficial acts, or private conduct is the third. Private conduct was brought into play when the court said that the electors in other states, the fraudulent electors, for instance, in Arizona, the court pointed out in footnote 2 of their 119-page opinion that conduct was under the purview of the United States Congress dealing with electors in states and not the president. It wasn't his official responsibility or duty, and therefore, because it wasn't an Article 2 constitutional core duty, that it was a private act or private conduct, and therefore was still prosecutable. Official acts are those that come under the penumbra of Article 2 of the Constitution. Those would be things like giving pardons, entering into treaties, placing people in official offices, and therefore firing people. That's also important in this case because as an official act was charged by the special prosecutor was the fraudulent investigations that were allegedly started by Trump in order to prolong the election. And those fraudulent investigations were charged, and the Supreme Court said today that those were official acts, that firing, hiring somebody under the purview of the executive office, and also the ability to prosecute is a core function of solely of the executive branch, where the president, who oversees the Department of Justice, and therefore any prosecution that's emanated from the Department of Justice is under the sole purview of the president ultimately. And therefore, the president, even if it's fraudulently induced, it is not an unofficial or private conduct. It is an official act. And those charges now would be dismissed by the special prosecutor.
Some major implications. This broke down pretty much exactly along party lines. Can you briefly describe the dissent, the scathing dissent, and what the minority's concerns are?
Yeah, let me read to you a paragraph from the dissent. This is how the dissent starts. The majority thinks that Trump should be immune from federal prosecutions, and so invents atextual, ahistorical, and unjustifiable immunity that puts the president above the law. That's how the dissent starts, and that's the kindest part of the dissent. One of the things you mentioned, the dissent went along, or the case was decided along party lines 6-3, except for one point where Justice Barrett, who was a conservative who was appointed by Trump, sided with the Democrats, if you will, the Democrat appointees or the minority in this case. So it was a 5-4 decision on a very important point, and that is the admission of evidence in a case like this. The court said, and Justice Barrett sided with the minority, that evidence that's adduced of criminality, if it's under an official act, receives immunity, and therefore those acts cannot be introduced as evidence in a trial. So for contextual purposes, if, for instance, the president hypothetically were to take a bribe for a pardon, a pardon is his official core constitutional duties under Article 2. It says that he and only he or she can pardon individuals. Therefore, that is an official act which immunity would apply. If the president were to receive a bribe in return for a pardon, that would not be prosecutable. In addition, as Judge Barrett suggested, that even though that's receives immunity, that still should be admissible evidence for contextual conduct in a criminal case, if so be. And she said there are other judicial ways to keep that evidence out or to determine whether it's admissible under Rules 404B or 105 under the Federal Rules of Evidence. Those now are not admissible. So that's going, the juxt of this is that all of the cases all 4 of the cases go back to the trial court for determination whether an act is official, whether the conduct is presumptively immune, absolutely immune, or private conduct. So what will happen from this is that none of these cases will obviously be tried before the election.
Right.
If Trump were to win the election, then he alone would have the decision under this case, because he is the sole arbiter of prosecutions under this case law. He would have the ability to, of course, dismiss the cases against him.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, we will see in the coming months and years just how impactful this case will be on American history. Rick Convertino, as always, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Shana.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.